For basically all of human history, we've been asking this one massive question. What happens after we die? Well, for Dr. Jeffrey Long, a cancer doctor, this wasn't some philosophical thought experiment. He was facing it with his patients every single day. And that led him on a journey, decades long, collecting thousands of stories from people who went to that brink and came back. What he found, the evidence they brought with them, it really challenges everything we think we know about where life ends and something else begins.
So the whole thing really boils down to this one question. When your heart stops beating and all that electrical activity in your brain just flatlines, what's left? What can you possibly experience? Well, based on everything we know about biology, the answer should be absolutely nothing.
From a purely medical point of view, it's an open and shut case. No brain activity means no consciousness, and no consciousness means no experience, right? The lights just go out. It should be total, complete oblivion. The end.
And yet, for millions of people who've been brought back from that edge, that's not what happened at all. Instead of nothingness, they describe the start of a journey, a clear, structured, and profoundly life-changing experience. So, what is this evidence they're bringing back with them? Let's take a look. We're going to start with one of the most mind-bending parts of all this, a paradox that hits you right away: the ability to see even when your eyes, your brain, none of the physical hardware for sight should be working.
Okay, just think about this for a second. This is a quote from a woman named Vickie. Now, Vickie was born totally and completely blind. She had never, ever experienced sight. And yet, during her near-death experience, she described floating on the ceiling, looking down at her own body, and seeing everything with perfect clarity. So I have to ask, how is that even possible? This one story alone just completely challenges our most basic ideas about consciousness.
So let's get really clear on what we're talking about. In this research, an NDE is not some vague, fuzzy dream. We're talking about a lucid, organized, and memorable experience that happens when a person is medically out, like in cardiac arrest, when there's literally no heartbeat and no blood getting to the brain. And that brings us to our first pillar of evidence, which tackles this huge medical mystery head-on. How can anyone have a clear, organized, even hyper-real experience when the very organ we believe creates consciousness is offline? This number is it's staggering, 78.4%. That's the percentage of people in Dr. Long's massive study who said that during their NDE, they had more consciousness and alertness than in their normal everyday life. Not less consciousness, not the same, more. And this quote just nails what that feels like. People don't just say they were awake. They talk about this state of supernormal awareness, a level of clarity and understanding that's way beyond what our normal physical senses can deliver. And you see this theme over and over again. Okay, so let's just break down the biological problem here. When you're under general anesthesia, you are medically unconscious. That's the point. When you're in cardiac arrest, blood flow to your brain stops, and it shuts down in seconds. Either one of these things should make having a clear memory impossible.
Right, so people often try to explain NDEs as, a brain hallucinating because it's starved of oxygen. But when somebody has a detailed, coherent NDE, while they are both under general anesthesia and in cardiac arrest, that explanation just doesn't work. It's not just inexplicable, it's doubly inexplicable from a medical standpoint. And yet we have thousands of these accounts, and they are remarkably consistent.
All right, so that's all about the internal experience. But what about evidence that's, outside of a person's head, things we can actually check? Let's move on to the second pillar: verifiable, real-world observations. This is where things get really wild. A lot of NDEers talk about floating above their body and watching everything that's happening. And when researchers go back and check their stories, the results are just incredible. As you can see, studies find that what they saw was 92% accurate. Dr. Long's own research found that almost 98% of these accounts were totally realistic. And for those who investigated their own experience, they found 0 inaccuracies. They're describing complex medical procedures in detail that they could have no way of knowing. Susan's story is a perfect example. After her heart stopped, she was able to describe everything the medical team did step by step. And later, every single person in that room confirmed her story was spot on. How do you explain that? And here's another kind of evidence that's even tougher to explain away. Sometimes people meet relatives who have passed on, and you might think, okay, that's just wishful thinking. But what happens when they meet a relative they never even knew they had, or someone they had no idea had just died? This is the story of a little girl named Sandy. She was just 5 years old when she had an NDE. During it, she met another girl who said she was her sister, named Willie. When Sandy told her parents, they were just floored. They had lost a daughter named Willie before Sandy was born, but they had never, ever told her other kids about her. That is just such powerful evidence because there's no way she could have known that. So we've got these incredible, verifiable accounts. But a skeptic could still argue they're just fantasies, shaped by a person's culture or religion. And that brings us to the third pillar of evidence, the amazing consistency of the experience all around the world.
Seriously, it doesn't matter if the story comes from someone in the United States or Iran or Japan. The basic structure is the same. Researchers have pinpointed 12 core elements, things like leaving the body, going through a tunnel, meeting a being of light, and they almost always show up in the same logical order, no matter what that person believed before it happened.
And here's the kicker. The NDEs of really young children, some of them so young they can barely talk, are almost identical to those of adults. I mean, these are kids who haven't had time to absorb complex ideas about religion or the afterlife, yet their experiences have the exact same core structure. That really suggests this isn't about what you expect to happen.
Okay, and for our final point, let's look at what might just be the most undeniable piece of evidence there is: the deep, permanent, and life-altering changes these experiences have on the people who go through them. Just look at this shift. Before their NDE, less than a quarter of people were totally certain there was an afterlife. Afterwards, that number jumps to over 84%. And this isn't just a small change of heart. We're talking about a fundamental transformation into a state of complete and total certainty. And what happens when you have that kind of certainty? Well, this happens. The fear of death, one of our most basic primal fears, it practically vanishes. Before, a third of them greatly feared death. After, that's down to less than 3%. They don't just hope there's something more. They feel like they know, and that changes everything about how they see their own mortality. But maybe the most compelling piece of data, when you get right down to it, is this. To the people who actually have these experiences, even decades later, there is no question about its reality. An incredible 94% say it was definitely real. And many of them will add that it felt more real than their everyday life. So this leaves us with one final big thought to chew on. If we just for a moment set aside the whole debate about proof and just look at the evidence, the incredible consistency, the verifiable facts, the profound after effects, what are we left with? We're left with an experience that feels absolutely real to those who have it, and one that carries a consistent message of overwhelming love, of being connected to everything, and a deep reassurance that our consciousness continues. So the question becomes, what could that message mean for how all of us choose to live our lives, right here and now?